I'm Chris Farrell from the official GonnaGeek.com podcast, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other geeky podcasts over at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Gather round the Philco Radio, boys and girls, and welcome to episode 149 of Better Podcasting. On this show, we give you clean audio tips.
In this week's Better Podcasting Download, we tell you about how much effort podcasting really is.
And finally, in this week's Better Podback, our listeners respond to Steven's 10th podiversary and my audio wiring diagram.
Lauren, can you remind me what the name of the show is again? I forget.
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Welcome to the 149th episode of Better Podcasting. I am Stephen John Drew, and with me, of course, is Stargate Pioneer.
149, that means we are one away from 150. It's been a fun... Actually, this is 150 because we did an episode 0, but we'll just erase all that and we'll just pretend the next one is 150. But it's been a fun 149 episodes with you, Stephen.
Absolutely. And one of the most fun things that we've done that's been related to this is some of those side projects, including some of those amazing geeky reviews that you've done over on the Gonna Geek Gear channel at youtube.com/GonnaGeekGear. You've done a lot of really good ones over there, SP, but this time it was my turn to do something. And for those of you who have been hearing us talk about Skype NDI, and you've heard the podcast world talk about Skype NDI, you might be wondering, how do you use that? Well, I did build a video with the help, of course, of Stargate Pioneer and Chris Farrell, walking you through how to enable Skype NDI and how you can use it on not one, not two, but 3 different video switching programs. That's right. If you head to www.geeks.link/Skype NDI, it's about an 18-minute video, and I walk you through the whole rigmarole using it with OBS Studio, Streamlabs OBS, and of course the one we use here, XSplit. So check that out at geeks.link/Skype NDI if you want to find out a little bit more about how to use it there. And I'll even show you how we mask the official GonnaGeek.com show to have that overlay. So check that out again at geeks.link/Skype NDI.
Another thing that we love to do every episode is we love to talk about how you could have saved your podcast story or how you did save your podcast. Well, this week it's how I could have saved my podcast story. And we go into the social media area. We grab an article that takes our interest and we talk about how we could have saved our podcast. And this week is no different. We have an article which says we just finished episode 11 and still working out the audio kinks. I think I have all the compression/noise gate/equalizer settings finally set correctly. The only thing is, when we podcast in our kitchen, there is a constant white noise in the background. I'm thinking it's because of the open area as well as the central air conditioning running not far from where we sit. However, when we podcast from our bedroom, which is what's smaller, it has carpet and no air conditioning unit. It sounds better, but it kind of awkward podcasting from the bed and trying to figure out a better setup. All that to ask, where do you podcast from? And this was on the podcasting subreddit, and it was posted by DS Heckler 08 about a month ago before we recorded this. So, Stephen, what are some of the quick tips that you would give to the poster here on how to make his kitchen audio a little bit better?
Well, first off, let's just go ahead and say we got a whole segment for you. Let's go ahead and talk about that right now. All right. So we obviously have that Reddit post there, but we also recently received a question from a listener. That's right. We had a tweet from Ferris got a jump on Halloween this year, which is the full Twitter name. No, the username is @DXFerris. And Ferris said, what's an episode/S in which you discuss reducing/eliminating ambient noise, like how to record quality audio while the air conditioner is running, or the missus upstairs walking around, asking for a friend. So maybe Ferris is the same as that Reddit poster, but we don't know. I'm guessing not, but maybe. We could start that rumor. But we wanted to talk about this. Now, we've often talked before on this show how it's important to have a clean sound, and we've talked about a few different ways on how you can achieve that. But today, we wanted to focus more on the less technical side of things to obtain that cleaner audio. Now, it is important to note that we have talked a lot about these technical things before. And so while we could delve into these more, because we've covered them extensively, we're just going to give a quick synopsis of some of these things before we move on to the fresh information. So we've got some other episodes to reference if you want to get into the more technical side of things. SP, what is one of the first technical side of things that we want to mention?
You're going to want to consider the equipment you're recording with. For example, you want to make sure that you have a quality audio mixer or hardware recorder that isn't adding too much noise due to basically the preamps or the electronics within the device. And fortunately, we actually did an episode on that way back in episode 6, which was audio mixers and hardware recorders. The bottom line, though, is that you need to make sure it has clean preamps and does not impose a lot of hiss into your track. What a clean preamp means is that you can crank up the gain to the level that you need to power your microphone and not get that hiss. That is clean preamps or clean noise from your recorder or from your mixer audio interface. Now, some of the less expensive products will do this. One of the best ways you can test this is to start recording without the cable plugged in and then turn up the gain. And that will tell you how much clean gain that you have in the recording, because when you start to hear that hiss or that whine, that kind of electronic zzz, then you'll know that you have maxed out where your clean gain really is. Now, this is not always foolproof, but it can help a little bit. And some products will start hissing like mad when you eventually get up to a certain level. And that is not good. But, Stephen, that is not the only thing that you need to consider.
No, you also need to make sure that you're choosing and using the right microphone and make sure you're using it properly. This includes picking the one that's right not only for your budget, but also your setup. You want to make sure this microphone's properly dialed into your setup, and you need to make sure your levels for that microphone are properly set. Now, considerations you should have when you're picking the microphone, because obviously your sound is going to start right there at the microphone. You want to consider the balance of audio quality versus noise reduction that you need for your specific setup. We recommend staying away from condensers for this reason, but did you know that there are a variety of different type of dynamic microphones with different styles of pickup, right, SP?
Yeah, generally speaking, we on Better Podcasting use the large diaphragm dynamic microphones because they have a cardioid pattern, and there are some that you can get that are really good at rejecting the side noise or the ambient sounds or the back sounds, and it is not in front of the microphone capsule where you will be talking into, but it will be on the sides and on the rear of the microphone. So they're better at doing the noise rejection, or at least some of them are. And you may not get as full of a sound as a condenser microphone, but these microphones can be amazing. Now, the Sennheiser MD46, for some reason, that puppy is just amazing, and it would be my recommendation. I own several of them. I own 6. I've actually purchased some from some of my co-hosts on the Good Geek Network so they could go out and do interviews. This microphone was specifically created by Sennheiser on commission from NBC Sports before the 2000 Sydney Olympics, and it has not disappointed ever since. The only thing that's wrong with it nowadays is it's not wireless, but that's good for you as a hobby podcaster because that means it's not too expensive. You can get them brand new for about $199 US. And on eBay, you can regularly get them for like $120, $130. They're amazing microphones. They give amazing sound. They have a tight cardioid pattern, and they have relatively little or no handling noise because they're meant to be an interview microphone where you're passing the microphone back and forth. And in an environment like a noisy dorm room, they would be amazing, Stephen. If you have any noise going on around you, you're not going to completely eliminate it, but the tight cardioid pattern combined with the great sound, those microphones are phenomenal. So once again, that's the Sennheiser MD46.
And while we probably didn't talk about the MD46 in these episodes, we do have a couple of episodes for you to reference, which is episodes 29 through 31 if you want to go a little further into choosing and using your microphone. Specifically, one thing I want to highlight in this is in episode 29, we covered a bunch of level discussions, so how to set your levels. So if you want to get into that, you can definitely go ahead and head into episode 29 and hear that. But also along these lines, episode 103, if you want to get all technical about minimizing noise specifically in your audio chain, because that is a valid consideration, you can check that out in episode 103, where we talk specifically on how to reduce some of said noise in your audio chain. Now, we recently, and for those new listeners who are just checking out the show, thank you for joining us. Episode 128, we talked about podcasting in less than ideal conditions. Now, we definitely went a little bit more extreme on that, so if you want to check that out, that might also give you some tips and thoughts on how you might be able to manipulate your setup if it's a less than ideal condition. And finally, if you have disregarded our advice and you've gone with the condenser because you know what, you saw Lady Gaga recording with one on the latest episode of Reality Recordings Central, you can go ahead and check out episode 47, where we had talked about some condenser considerations way back when. Ignore those hosts. They were young. They were immature.
I would say to ignore the hosts at any point in time because we're always young and immature here. But now that we've gotten all that technical stuff out of the way, let's move on to the less techy other noise considerations. So let's talk about room noise to start out with. You know, it's all well and good to get that good microphone that we talked about, to get that clean audio signal through your audio chain and make sure your line noise is removed as much as possible. But it's pretty useless if you have to have such a loud environment around you. And this is why you should draw your attention to the room that you're recording in first. Let's take a look at all the factors that are in the consideration for the room. First of all, what is making noise in the room? What could make noise in the room? What is causing sound to bleed into your lines? And we've prepared some examples of some different considerations. The first thing that we're going to talk about in the room is the computer. I know a lot of podcasters actually use a computer to podcast with. We actually did a whole episode about not podcasting with a computer, like you can go directly into a portable digital recorder or maybe your phone. But let's just say you have a computer in the room. It's one of the most often overlooked room consideration. It's the device that many people need to podcast. Whether it's a laptop, a desktop, it's important to remember that there are usually fans on these devices. Some of the newer ones, some of the newer laptops don't have fans, but a lot of times there's fans in those devices and they can easily get picked up by your microphone. One of the best tips for this is to place it away from your microphone. For example, with desktops, place them under your desk. Yes, we know this is bad for your computer's airflow, but right on your desk will likely bring noise in from a variety of different factors. It's closer to the microphone. It's actually on the table. It might be connected to the microphone stand in some way. You're going to get that vibration and that sound into your microphone, even if you're using one of those phenomenal microphones that we talked about. Now, how I combated this is I actually placed my desktop to the side of my table on a dedicated PC table or a desktop table that was built specifically for me by Better Podcasting listener Diami Plotke under commission. So I could have done it myself, but at the time I didn't have the time. I thought it would be better to actually commission somebody to build something. He did a phenomenal job. He did exactly what I wanted him to do. and it now houses my computer. It is not on the table. It is not the height of the table. It's off to the side. It's got good airflow, and I don't get that noise from the fans or the vibration from the computer into my system, my recording system. Now, laptops, if they have a fan in them, can be more difficult. But if you place them maybe behind the microphone, especially if you're using a dynamic cardioid microphone or a super cardioid microphone, there will be less likely to be picked up by the microphone. Now, that sound could bounce off your chest and get into the microphone, but there's only so much you can do along the way to minimize the noise coming from those laptops. Pay attention to what they're touching. These vibrations can be picked up by the microphone, especially if they're a laptop, because you can't really put it off to the side. They're going to be on the table in front of you. If you have a microphone stand that happens to be put on the table, not onto the side, or mounted like I do through a boom arm, that noise can then translate into the microphone. And now, you can mitigate this by putting some sort of rubber mat, a foam mat, underneath both the laptop and the microphone stand. You can use a towel. We've done that before on Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. Lauren actually used a towel on her mic stand for a while before she got a boom arm. That will help isolate the vibrations from your table, anything that's on the table, whether it's somebody that's strumming their fingertips, whether that's the computer, whether that's you moving the mouse around, clicking on the mouse. That will help isolate that from your microphone and get you that cleaner audio.
A second ago, SP, you mentioned microphone stands. That's actually one of the tips we have, is to get yourself a microphone stand that's best for your studio. But if you can, accept that it's going to be bigger than you probably want in order to keep the sound clean. Because the ATR 2100, the AT 2005, our favorite microphones, they come with these tiny little tripod stands. And quite honestly, I'll just go ahead and say that they're pretty garbage. Yes, I know a lot of people have used them quite successfully and whatnot, but for noise reduction, they pick up everything. They're so small, there's like no vibration reduction. And so if you get yourself a microphone stand, you can help eliminate some of that noise, especially if you can make that microphone stand connected or held up independently of your setup. And what I mean by that is, like, think of if you've ever seen a performer on stage and they have a microphone boom arm where it's like sort of angled down and they're playing the guitar, an acoustic guitar or whatever. That sort of thing could be used for your microphone, and that would be sitting there independently, and it would be on the ground as opposed to connected to your desk, where when you bump your desk, that sound goes through your microphone stand. But if you get like a scissor arm like SP and I have, if you can find a way to connect that independently, that works a lot better. SP actually has his mounted to the side of his room. He's got it on a table sort of thing, a tray that's actually on his wall. So again, independent of his desk, but definitely finding a way to get that stand isolated makes a big difference with from preventing all of that pickup of the vibrations and whatnot. Now, while you are looking at stands, you also want to make sure you're looking at shock mounts, because shock mounts can help reduce those vibrations. We usually recommend getting one of those sort of spider type ones where they're elastics and they're holding in the microphone. But if you're on a budget, there's an Onstage MY325 is the name of it. The company is called Onstage, and the model is MY325. They look almost just like a standard mic clip, but the way they're designed, they actually will help reduce vibration a little bit. It's what I travel with, and it makes quite a difference. So definitely try to get yourself a shock mount to help reduce some of those vibrations. Now, vibrations are not the only problem on your desk. One of the other things that people often have troubles with is, of course, the
Teletype keyboard.
Right, the Teletype keyboard. Yeah. What's up with that, SP?
If you have a computer, odds are you're going to be using it to type in something, to modify show notes, to chat with live listeners if you happen to be live streaming, or to talk to your co-host back and forth if you're over the internet. So you're going to have to type, and the best thing to do is get a keyboard that's a little bit quieter than those big Cherry MX Blue keys that I had when computers first came out. And if you can go to the low profile and get something that's quieter, that doesn't clack so much, it's going to be better for your recording, even with a dynamic cardioid microphone. As you just heard in Steven's track, as he was talking and typing on the keyboard, you're going to get that infiltration into the microphone, no matter how good it is. Just because you're so close to the keyboard, at the very least, the sound is going to bounce off your chest and into the microphone. So the quieter those keys can be, the better off. And if you do have to type, try to type softly and not as rapidly, and that will help as well. There's another thing that also is very prevalent, and perhaps more prevalent, because maybe you're not actually typing on the keyboard. And if you just heard those clicks in the background, that is because Steven was clicking his mouse. Now, I went out of my way and I got a quiet mouse. I just tried it out and I loved it so much. I actually got two of them. One is for my main computer and one is for my travel laptop. And these are the Logitech M330s. They're not completely silent, but they're the quietest, most comfortable mice I've ever used. If you want a high performance mouse, like you're a gamer and you just have to have that mouse that has 12 different controls and actuators on it, try to find one that's a little bit more quiet, or use it a little bit more gingerly as you are recording. But that is the number one thing I hear from podcasts that we are reviewing, that people ask me to go ahead and say, hey, how do you like my show? If they apply to the network. First of all, I can instantly tell if they're using a condenser microphone. Usually, I think 95 to 98% of the time, just because I'm hearing all the reverb in their room. But then the other thing that gives it away is their mouse. They're clicking the mouse the whole time and I'm hearing it and I'm going, oh my gosh, it's really hard to hide even a quiet mouse from a condenser microphone. So if you do have a mouse and if you're using it, try to use a quieter one, or at least try to have softer touch. Now, some of them have click wheels that there's no way you're going to actually get them quieter. So probably not use that one while you're recording. But those are some prime examples of things that you can do while you're recording to eliminate that ambient noise from the background.
You know, there's another ambient device that we all are just so used to. We forget that it's there. And do you know how often I have heard in the middle of a podcast, yeah, I'm talking about phones on vibrate mode. It is amazing how many people have phones on vibrate, okay? It's all well and good to have your alarm or your phone accidentally ring during podcast recording. It's easy, edit that out. But sometimes the vibrate, we're used to having the vibrate happen throughout your entire day, and so you're used to ignoring it. So this might be going and you might not hear it, but your audience will hear it back. So be aware of this. If you use a device where you can shut off vibrate altogether, Android, do that. Make sure that you do that.
Well, you can on the Apple iOS too.
Android had it first. But also be aware that if you are going to do that, try and have your phone on vibrate, try to mask it by having a piece of foam or having something. Leave it in your pocket even, because if it's in your pocket and you're using a dynamic microphone, the odds are it's not going to be as noticeable. But try to mask that, because we want to make sure that you don't have your audience distracted by hearing that vibrate. And they do. They hear it.
Another little tip, since Steven's told you to put it in your pocket, if you happen to have an iPhone 6, don't bend your legs too much when you're sitting down, because this thing will bend. Another thing that you often do when you're podcasting as you're going along, maybe it's hot outside and maybe you just worked out and maybe you just are parched, right? And you're trying to get some liquid, or maybe you're trying to get some caffeine to get amped up for the rest of the show, or whatever you're trying to do. You're drinking, right? The drinking can minimize the slurping. Please minimize the slurping or mute yourself during the actual recording. But another thing that happens all the time, and I hear this all the time, especially in the podcasts that are guys with beers drinking or something like that, you always hear the can or the mug or whatever clicking on the tabletop. And I'm just banging mine right now a couple times. Well, that is why we use actually soft coasters. I mean, even hard coasters will do that, but we actually commission these soft coasters. We own them, and you can get them anywhere. They're cork and leather. You can get them, and they're soft, And that way you can put it down. And yes, if you put it down hard, you're going to hear a thump, a lower thump, but you're not going to hear that higher frequency clink when it goes down. So those are some things that you should be aware of when you're recording to try to not get that audio noise within there. But in addition to that, every time you move, you're making noise. And the microphone, even if you have noise isolating headphones on, which we talked about in a previous episode, 2 episodes ago, even if you have them on, you might not realize that your clothing is actually scratching on your skin or it's rubbing on each other or whatever. And if you have your sensitivity on that microphone moved up, you're going to hear the clothes actually rustling. If you have a lavalier microphone, I guarantee you're going to hear clothes rustling throughout your recording. You might also, when you move, have a creaky chair. And we've discussed this before on Better Podcasting as well, where we're trying to get the optimal chair. And we just resigned ourselves to, well, maybe we don't need to move so much when we record to get those recording creaks out. And then if you're actually using paper documents, you might want to not do that or rustle it unless you're going for the effect, because it used to be a radio effect for a while. Like people are like, oh, I'm reading the copy here. Well, we were just talking about using keyboards and mice because that is how you're reading copy now, unless you actually print out something or write something, you handwrite something and you have it available for you as a re-record. Try to minimize all of that because it will all add to a better audio experience for your listener unless you're doing it for effect.
But you also want to consider what's happening outside of your studio as well. Okay, I understand your studio might just be your closet, but we're going to call it a studio. Call it your podcast studio. And one example that we have of this is that you might have neighbors that will mow their lawn outside of your window, or they might have very loud trucks. These are things that you need to consider. You might have family that occasionally gets very loud, and with that, you might want to set some boundaries with them and expectations while you record. Or you might have a doorbell nearby, or a door that slams. The odds are that all of these things are going to be variables that are fairly hard for you to control. Right, SB?
Yeah, but the best thing you can do is try to be prepared for when it happens. For example, let's take the lawnmower, because that's the first thing we talked about. Unless it's right outside your window, you might be able to get a dynamic microphone, turn down the gain a little bit, face it away from the main noise source, which happens to be a window, and you might be able to mitigate the lawnmower noise. Trains, we have had trains on our podcast before with both me, with Starling Tribune and Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's an issue. And you might eventually, if you're in a closet, if you're in a room with one window, like you're not out in your main living room or dining room or whatever, and there's just one window, you might want to fabricate a foam pad to cover your room's window when you record, and that acts as a sound attenuation, and you could put it up and then take it down every time you record. That could be good as well. Now, Stephen talked about boundaries and family and setting boundaries. Clearly communicating can help in these matters. For example, I have told my whole family, if that door is closed, I am recording, and that door is only closed when I'm recording. And that's the deal I've made with my family. Now, Stephen, you have little kids, and it's probably around bedtime a couple of times when we record. How have you clearly communicated the need to be quiet with them?
Luckily, my wife is just a rock when it comes to this sort of stuff, and she's there to support me on this and help keep the kids quiet. She tries to tell them, hey, you're a little loud, quiet down. Those people who have watched the live stream have noticed, have probably on 1 or 2 occasions seen me have to get up and say, hey guys, a little too loud. But, you know, overall, the expectations work wonders. Now, in these situations where you can't set expectations, like you're probably not going to your neighbor and going, hey, Joe, or hey, Jane, do the podcast. Can you keep it down? Not a great way to make neighbors. Not a great way to make friends with your neighbors. So consider what's the best time to record with these factors. Like, let's say it's been rainy for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, it's a beautiful sunny day, and it's the only sunny day in the forecast, and that falls on a Saturday morning. What do you think your neighbors are going to do on that nice, dry, sunny day? Probably mow their lawn.
Lots of yard work.
Lots of yard work. So that Saturday morning might not be the best time to record. So considering when exactly are these things happening? Same thing goes if you're in a construction zone. Construction generally happens in the day. Maybe try to record in the evening so you're not getting that truck backing up noise. Considering these type of things and trying to work around them can definitely help with these external factors that are not under your control. Oh, by the way, that train thing as well. Look at the train schedule. When's the train come through? And if you can avoid it, book it around it.
Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. So let's move into our experiences. We talked a little bit about it, but let's get in a little more in depth of our experience. So over the years, and Steven's podcast for 10 years, I think I'm at like year 8 now myself. Over the years, we've had some experiences in noise reduction that we wanted to share. First of all, I talked about it before, but we're going to specifically mention it. Muting your microphone whenever possible, especially you're recording over the internet, is a lifesaver. This is something that we both highly appreciate, both in ourselves and our co-hosts, especially because we're recording on both of our ends. So muting the microphone and not having to deal with that even in post saves so much time with editing. And this includes stuff like coughing, sneezing, really all bodily functions that make noise that gets picked up. And you know what I'm talking about with all other bodily functions there, right? Okay, so that can help muting your microphone. Also, we talked a little bit about it with the window, but adding foam where it might help. So we're not talking about acoustic foam, although that can help and could be really expensive. We actually have other examples of where we can use foam for noise abatement, right, Steven?
Absolutely. One of the things that I actually did was where I podcast, I have a living room right above me. And you know what kids like to do? They like to play. And sometimes they like to drop things, like when they're mad and they've lost at a game and they drop their controller. You know, that sort of stuff. Well, what I ended up doing was, because I have laminate flooring up there, which for those of you not familiar, has very little insulation, meaning it's basically like a board between me and them. What we ended up doing was, because we have an area rug, I was able to go and get some foam puzzle pieces from the store. If you've ever been down the kids' aisles, you might have seen that. I grabbed some of those foam pieces and I put them underneath my area rug. So when you come in, you don't really tell because it's under the area rug, but it added enough of a pad that when they do just get up, it's not anywhere near as loud as it used to be, because, you know, kids can be loud. You know, the occasional dropping of something small, you no longer hear that. So that was a way that I solved that. Well, helped contribute towards solving that. It still comes through occasionally, but it makes the job easier. The other thing as well that I've done in the past is SP talked about possibly putting foam over your windows. Yes, that absolutely can make a difference. What I've been able to do sometimes is break sound by using some curtains that are a little bit thicker. So if I've ever had a situation where there's just something unavoidable noise going on, like let's say the kid has a friend over during recording, I've got some curtains that I can put up over top of my door, which helps add a little bit of a buffer. Yes, it's nowhere near what proper sound foam will do, but it breaks up that sound a little bit, and it does make a difference. I've done a couple of tests, and it does make a difference. So just another way to help break up that sound. And the other thing, while we're talking about foam, and you can Google how to do this, there's 1,000 options. If you are in a situation where you just have so much outside noise going on and you're trying to just hone in on minimizing what's picked up on your mic, do what we said earlier, which is keep your microphone pointed away from that. So like if you have your fridge going, don't have it behind you. Instead, have it in front of you so it's behind the microphone. And then you can build yourself a little foam box to go around your microphone. So you're talking in and it's just helping add the rejection to around your microphone so that it's essentially rejecting more of that noise. So that is another option that you can do with foam. It can add up, but yeah, some apartments, some places, it's just what you got to do.
Yeah, just to give you a mental picture of one possibility of what we're talking about, those milk crates, those plastic milk crates that you put milk in and they cart around milk with, you can get a hold of one of those and then put foam, egg cart foam around the sides, and then snake a cord in somehow and then put your microphone in the middle. That's what we're talking about in a sound box. It doesn't have to be something expensive. It could be, but it could be something as simple as that. It could be something as simple as creating a pillow fort around the microphone too. So it doesn't necessarily have to be built. You might want to try a pillow fort first, just to see if it works before you spend money and create something DIY. Another thing that you can do is ask your housemates to walk around with socks on and maybe not step so hard when you're recording. Sometimes that works, sometimes not, but it could, if it does work for you, it's one thing less to have to worry about. This is something that I did recently that I kind of regret it because I lost a piece of gear from it, maybe, but I'm glad we were able to keep on schedule, at least for better podcasting. And that's suffering for your craft. What we are talking about is instead of running the air conditioner or maybe the heater, which has a fan on it, especially if it's blowing right on you, suffer and like maybe cool it down a little bit too much right before you start recording and then shut it off so you don't have that fan blowing right on you. And if you're in a room that has a vent that maybe whistles, if you do the same thing that we just talked about with the foam over the window, maybe create a little foam cover to put over the vent just for when you're podcasting. Make sure it's only just when you're podcasting because you don't want to restrict the central airflow in your house. You can put it over that and maybe it will abate the noise, both the fan noise and maybe the whistling noise that comes through the vent. And if it's a cold day, bundle up. Like right now, when we're recording this, I know people will listen to this often into the future. It is summer and we're both wearing summer clothes, so we're not getting too hot. In the winter, you will see us with sweaters, with jerseys on, with stuff like that, with long shirts on, with long underwear underneath. You will see that because we need to keep warm when we're podcasting. And I'll tell you, these lights that we put in the studios, they're kind of warm too, and they warm up. But you will see us change our wardrobe when we go from summer to winter. Right now it's summer, so Steven's wearing a t-shirt and I'm wearing a polo shirt, and that's just how it goes.
That's
or golf
right.
shirt.
In the winter months, we change our clothes during the show. That's just our gimmick. You can just watch us change. Yep.
I knew you were going to go there.
As we start to wrap up this segment, we do want to touch on a couple of quick technical things that you've probably heard us mention if you've listened to our back catalog, but for the sake of this episode, we know a lot of people won't go back and listen. We want to make sure to mention them. Number one is make sure that you've applied your gain as early as possible within your chain. There's a couple exceptions to that depending on the equipment, but overall, you want to get your gain early on because otherwise it can just amplify hiss, and that can be a problem. And also there's a whole other side of things that come with that, where if you now have to go increase the gain in post, now you might hear more of that background noise that you didn't hear when you recorded that we just talked about. So definitely make sure that you try to get that as early as possible. The other thing that we want to mention is if you are having problems with noise that you think isn't an outside source, like you're getting a buzz or a hum or a whine, we wanted to mention ground loop isolators. Ground loop isolators or DI boxes, direct injection boxes that have a ground lift, that can be a lifesaver if you're having some form of electrical problem that's causing a ground hum, a ground hiss, or a ground whine. That's all the different ways that ground loops can definitely show themselves. And if you get one of those, it can help remove that. I have way too many in my setup. I know that SP has some and some DI boxes, but definitely it can help solve these problems if you're pulling your hair out.
Yeah, and we don't need any more hair pulled out because we're older. Definitely, especially Chris over on the GonnaGeek.com show, ATGN, and Starling Tribune. We don't need him losing any more hair. I don't think he has any more hair he can lose.
Wow, taking shots when he's not even here. Wow.
I know. I was trying to protect him. He doesn't have hair to lose, so let's not make him pull out his hair. And also, be prepared, as a final thoughts, be prepared to re-record if you need to. If your audio is crap and you can re-record, please re-record. I just listened to an episode of a podcast in the last couple of days that I really wanted to listen to. Their audio was crap, and I suffered through it just because I wanted to hear the content that much. But if it's just a regular episode, I guarantee you people are going to shut it off because the audio is not that great. So be prepared to re-record that audio if you can. And then also, we said it before, we'll say it again, select the time of day that fits best. You don't hear Stephen and I recording while there are airplanes going overhead or lawnmowers or monster trucks, so on and so forth. We generally pick a time that is minimized. So just be prepared to select the time that the audio from outside sources is not going to infiltrate your recording as much as possible. Maybe you live next to a concert venue. Maybe you live next to a high school that has a marching band that practices. I mean, I've been in all those situations, and you just have to work around it.
But, of course, if you do live right in between a monster truck air show, cheerleading concert, whatever it was SP said, definitely start yourself one of those podcasts. Make it themed about that. And then it'll just be ambient noise that goes along with your podcast. That's what you should do.
Oh, yeah, like Jason Bryant does over on his wrestling podcast.
Absolutely. So if you have tips for how you help reduce noise, please let us know. What's been your best advice for this sort of situation, and what sort of struggles have you had? You can definitely go ahead and reach us at BetterPod on Twitter. You can go over to facebook.com/betterpodcasting or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com. Because we do have a full video show available at betterpodcasting.com, please, we encourage you to send us a video clip so that we can include your video clip. And if you are going to send something in, feel free to include the name of your podcast, because we want to make sure to give you credit. But let's go ahead and move on to the Better Podcasting download.
Welcome to this week's Better Podcasting Download.
I ran across a Reddit post a while back that I just couldn't not pass up the opportunity to respond with passion. And I wasn't yelling. I wasn't downplaying the original poster. I was legitimately saying, I can't believe you're posting this. And here is why. This is what I would caution you against. So the title of the post was, How Much Effort is Podcasting Really? I thought, that's an interesting title. So I went in and read it. And the post from Kevin says, I'm interested in podcasting, but I wonder how much effort it really is. Could you explain to me what you do spend your time on doing podcasts, what tools you spent the most time with, and what you find being the biggest drag so I can better assess if podcasting is for me? Thanks in advance. Kind regards, Kevin. Now, he had some answers to that originally, which keyed me in on it even more, which were basically along the lines of, I want to start a podcast and I want to make a lot of money on it and I want to do it fast. I was like, whoa, I can't believe somebody is asking that right now. What, maybe if they didn't know about podcasting, and maybe if they saw a couple of articles out there, or maybe listen to some older podcasts, they might get the wrong impression. And I was like, okay, I am going to respond. And this is a really lengthy response here, but I'm going to read it in its entirety because I think it goes to a lot of what we've been talking about with hobby podcasting and podcasting in general for closing in on 3 years now.
And by the way, I just got to say that SP is right. It's a lengthy response, but I absolutely 100% supported him on this because I think that it hits so many good points. And why listen to my crappy self when you can hear SP instead?
Okay, so here we go. Quote, this is my response. Quote, so you say you want to make podcasting a business. How much of a current following do you have? And will that following listen to you on a podcast? Because even if you do have a large following, that doesn't necessarily mean you will have a successful monetized podcast. Both Alex Baldwin and Kathy Lee Gifford recently tried to monetize a podcast within the last couple of years, and both failed. It's true. Look it up. But why they failed is more appropriate because you don't have a large following to have a successful business podcast. As you mentioned, having quality content is largely the basis for monetizing a podcast. What sort of content do you intend to produce? Even when you have quality content, then there is the matter of promoting. How much are you going to spend on promotion? A few years ago, this would not have been so much of an issue, but now with quote unquote big business starting to come into the space with their quote unquote big pockets, you are competing with billboards, radio advertisement spots in major markets, and intense and expensive online social media campaigns in addition to advertising on other podcasts or through podcast listening apps like Overcast. But you said you wanted to make it a business. Are you aware that the median downloads per episode over 30 days is 142? Are you aware that the mean downloads per episodes is less than 2,000? Are you aware that most major advertisers won't buy on your show without 5,000 downloads per episode? The number of podcasts that make it to 5,000 downloads or more per episode over the first 30 days of its show is well less than 50%. Where do these statistics come from? Libsyn publishes them every month via their The Feed podcast. Libsyn has somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 shows hosted with them, which makes the data statistically relevant. Plus, Libsyn stats are IAB Podcast Measurement Guidelines 2.0 compatible, which means they are industry standard statistics and not inflated like you would find on SoundCloud or FeedBurner. Now, how much effort goes into making a quality show? Well, if you look at a show like Serial that NPR or Gimlet Media might put out, they have a production staff of 15 per show, and they only do a certain number of episodes like a BBC television show. Even Mark Maron with WTF has a staff behind a show, but if you want to start solo, you will have to come up with the content, record the content, mix in royalty-free background music, none of that top 40 stuff, or you'll eventually be issued a cease and desist letter, obtain voiceovers, create your own copyright-free podcast artwork, edit the shows, promote the shows, and hustle your product, service, or show wherever you can. Most full-time podcasters end up working more than 40 hours a week to make this all possible and have diversified income streams and come across inauthentic because of it. Also, what sort of experience do you have in web design and maintenance? Do you want to learn? Are you comfortable with hiring it out? Just about every monetized business podcast out there has their own web presence. You need to become comfortable in how to handle your web presence and your brand. Do people still succeed? Yes. Look at Jennifer Briney on the Congressional Dish or Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. But it took these podcasters years to build a listener base, build their following, and become profitable. Often, quote unquote, pop-up hits take 3 years or more to catch on. So if you want to give it a go, I say, awesome. Podcasting is fun when you're talking about something that you are passionate about. I just didn't want you or anyone else that comes along to read this post to not have the proper expectations when starting a business show. I think it's better for you and your audience if you set the right goals and plan for your show. Unquote. That is my entire response, Stephen.
Yeah, I think it's a really excellent response and sets some really realistic expectations. This is one of those things that I think podcasting suffers with because of the nature of it. It's basically unregulated. There's no big laws or anything. Well, there's obviously copyright laws and things like that, but it's not like radio or television where there's a body, and I'm specifically not saying it because of different countries and whatnot, but there is a body that regulates these things. With podcasting, you don't have that as well. So many of the podcasts that are out there are by people who just record whatever using their iPhone, and there's a lot of garbage out there too. So you have people who go, oh my, I just heard about this podcasting thing. I've heard about how people are making money on podcasting. So then they pull up podcasts and they pull up that terrible sounding podcast that has like 10 hits, and they correlate the two of them together. They go, I can do this. I can do this because all podcasts make lots of money, because they just incorrectly link those two things together. And so I think a post like this is really needed to help people realize that it's not as black and white as it seems, and that there is a lot of work needed if you want to be successful at it. So I give you full kudos for this. I think that there's a lot of things that people hopefully will think about when they read this. And I think that it actually opens up a whole bigger discussion that I'm sure we'll get some listener feedback about. So thank you very much for taking the time to craft that response.
You bet. You know, the industry is changing. It's ever changing. Even podcasts that I talk about with a staff of 15. Last week, we talked about Panoply and Buzzsprout not actually podcasting anymore. And that is podcasts that had every chance to succeed. So podcasting is not a cut and dried thing. You're going to have to be unique. You're going to have to catch the attention of your listener, and you're going to have to build an audience over time. And I just want to make sure that people, when they're getting into podcasting, understand that it is not a runaway hit. It once was, like 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Yeah, you could make a lot of money from podcasting if you did things right. Instantaneously, you had that hockey stick growth. You're not going to have that today. I just want to make sure people are aware of that so they don't give the podcasting space a bad name and don't frustrate themselves in the process.
So the best way, though, what you're saying so that you can build that audience is to put a bunch of keywords in your title. Is that the right way to do it?
No, as we talked about this before, that is not the right way to do it. We keep hearing reports of more and more podcasts getting booted from the iTunes or Apple Podcasts, if you prefer different directories, because of the title keyword stuffing. And I have removed all the keywords from all my shows. I just don't want to be in that boat where my show is just not available in iTunes for new subscribers. Subscribers, the RSS feed gets pulled, but I want to make sure my show is available to anybody that's coming along.
Totally. I made the change myself. Frustrating. Again, can't wait for the behemoth to not be the behemoth, but it is what it is. So let's go ahead and move on to our Better Pod Back. All right, we got a tweet from @JonathanBloom, and Jonathan Bloom said, "Congratulations on 10 years. Really cool looking at your history. Oh, and I'll spill the beans. My friend is @nav_OX. So @nav_ox. And they are co-hosts on the Unshackled Fury podcast."
All right, Jonathan, thank you very much for getting that to us. We now know that you were talking to @nav_ox, and you guys just both mutually discovered that you listen to Better Podcasting. So that was a fun story a few episodes ago. Then also, we do have a couple of tweets that we received in response to the Twitter poll last week that we didn't go over. And one was from our very own Andrew from the Dad.io podcast. So @Dad.io_Andrew said, "Hey, @BetterPod, I was looking at setting up a GeoCity site for @Dad.io podcast."
Oh, that's awesome. By the way, before we continue here, I want to take a moment. We usually talk about the Gonna Geek Network, and we've talked before, and we promote Dad.io podcast. But I want to take this moment just to say that I think that people who are parents should really check out the Dad.io podcast. I think there's a lot of really interesting things that you can relate to. And more so, what's really cool is they're doing a lot of talks and some really neat things with their podcast that's relevant to being foster parents. So if you are a foster parent or you're thinking about it, definitely check out Dad.io podcast. They are definitely a podcast that I think is going to take off. I'm sure they probably are already doing well, and they're just going to continue to grow because they have some really neat things since I've found out about them that I've been interested in.
Yeah, I've always been impressed at their episodes. We also got another response to our Twitter poll last week, and it was from Emily Pro. By the way, the Twitter poll was about how do you promote your episodes on social media. And Emily, she and the @StoryBehindPod Twitter responded and said, "I love my Facebook group for the show. My listeners are awesome and post Africa by @Toto99com memes for me. And a close second is Instagram because it's fun to add some visual stuff to the show as well. I check Twitter a few times a day, but it can be a bit fire hosey. I've discovered that too, but if you create lists, it's a little bit easier to use Twitter. And I hate that I have to do it, but it's how I have to do it. Instagram is fun too. I actually have an Instagram account, and it's fun just scrolling through the pictures, but it's hard to promote a podcast that way as well. Anyway, Stephen, we also have a tweet from our new listener.
That's right. From @nav_ox. Hey, yeah, longtime fan. Keep up the great work. And here's to another 10 years of podcasting. Thank you. And I'm hoping that you're talking about SP because, I'm going to be rich in 6 months. That's my goal, is rich in 6 months off of podcasting and call it quits.
All right. You're going to move up to the Yucatan and live off the land up there, right?
Right.
At Bad Gamer Crowley tweeted us and he said, episode number 248 of the CC is down, which means he's listened to it. And CC, by the way, is Cantina Cast. Up next, at Better Pod, episode 146. These guys have been podcasting as long as I have been, just at a higher level. Hashtag podcast, hashtag podcast lives. Thank you very much, Mr. Crowley. Really appreciate the listen to episode 146.
We also got response to by a few people to a certain tweet that SP tweeted out. What was that tweet?
Oh, yes, the tweet where I basically said, I promised to redo my hashtag podcasting studio wiring diagram years ago. I finally took some time to knock it out today. So if you haven't had a chance, you can go to geeks.link/SP's diagram 2018 and you can see my wiring diagram. There's a lot of stuff connected to my audio system. The heart of it is my mixer. It's the Mackie Pro FX 16V2. There's just a lot of stuff connected to it, but it allows me to multi-track. It allows me to live stream both on audio on Spreaker and via Periscope. It allows me to have 3 in-studio guests. It just allows me so much. And it also allows me to listen to some old family recordings that are on cassette tape on my dual cassette tape deck. So you can see all that. Once again, it's geeks.link/SP's diagram 2018, and you can see what we're talking about. But we did get a response to that, Stephen.
That's right. Deami Palaki said, very complicated, but a powerful setup. Unrelated, we had Christopher Nessie respond to us saying, I haven't said hey in a while. I've been really enjoying the conversation and continuing to listen to Better Podcasting.
Hashtag podback.
Wow. With the hashtag podback, I like it. We should start getting people to use that hashtag. You should, you know what you should do? You should throw pod into whatever word that you can for podcasting. Do it.
We'll see. And that might be hashtag podgrets.
No, you know what it is? I'm putting hashtag pod pressure on people. That's right. I'm putting hashtag pod pressure on people to use pod in their words. That's what I'm doing.
That's right. Well, we'll just move on from the Twitters and we'll get into YouTube. On a couple of weeks ago, we had Better Podcasting episode number 147, selecting headphones and in-ear monitors, or IEMs. We had a response from American Liberty, said, good show, guys. As usual, full of truly useful information. Thanks. Well, thank you, American Liberty, too. And I'd just like to know what kind of show you have, and we will talk about it on the podcast. So go ahead and comment on the YouTube below, and we'll go ahead and name your show.
And finally, we also got on Reddit, we had a poster who said, I started diving into Better Podcasting and have gained some good insight on some other things. Just wanted to say thanks for all the info y'all provide.
It's y'all. It's not y'all. It's y'all.
Y'all.
Oh my gosh, you Canadian.
Hesitation there.
The Texans that listen to the show are going to go ape on you. That was from /u/lignifiable, LIGNIFIABLE. So thank you very much.
You can see why I skipped over it.
Yeah, that's right. It's another person we found out in the wild that just said, hey, I listen to Better Podcasting. That's great. And so thank you very much for listening. And thank you very much for telling us that you listen. That'd be great if you could let us know what your show is. We'll talk about it on the air. I think he did, actually. I think I listened to it. So I think we'll give it a week or two. So come back to us if you're listening to this. Let me know the name of your show again. And I know it's better now. He was making some tweaks to it, so I want to wait a couple weeks before I say what the name of the show is.
Awesome. So there you go. That's going to take us towards the end of the show. Before we wrap up, though, I just want to go ahead and say, yes, this is episode 149 of Better Podcasting today, which means the next one is episode 150. So naturally, we have episode 150 planned, but nothing after that. You know, this is zero planned. We've given up. So we want you to tell us, what exactly would you like us to cover in the future? Okay, that's not true. We actually have lots on the docket. But seriously, this today is an example on how what you ask us about can help shape the show. Please let us know, what burning questions do you have? What would you like us to maybe to revisit? Because yes, 149 episodes. Do the math on that. It was a long time ago we started. So things have changed. R.I.P. Blab.
Yes, all right, people. You're never gonna let that go for me, are you? Anyway, yeah, this show, we did a show 2 episodes ago on the headphones. That was due to a listener question. We will respond to you. It might take us a couple of weeks to get it in the rotation. So if you're looking for an answer right away, we might not be able to do that. But in a couple of weeks, if it's an interesting enough topic that we think a lot of people would benefit from, you bet we're going to actually reach out and do an episode and then answer all your questions and even more. But more importantly, if you have anything to say, you listener, I'm talking to you listener, all our listeners, if you have anything that you want us to cover, any actual recommendations on the topics that we covered today or in the past, please let us know. We'll talk about it on a future show, and please let us know the name of your show, and we'll talk about that on the show as well.
Awesome. So there you go. For episode 149 of Better Podcasting. I'm Stephen John Drew, typing really loudly, banging my coffee cup, and bouncing random things on my desk.
I'm SP saying it took me 5 hours, over 5 hours to do that wiring diagram. So I hope you like it.
Bye.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.
So definitely, we want to make sure. Oh, and SP is frozen. Oh, he dropped. He dropped. Let's see what's going on here. But see, this is the nice thing about Skype NDI is now we no longer see the Skype screen. It just freezes on the last thing. So we can go and make this. Hold on, can't do that. Which side is it? This side? No, it's this side. What's he looking? He's looking. There we go. I think you might be coming back. Dune. I was just doing the SP face, by the way. You're frozen on here, SP.
Mm-hmm.
See, you can see yourself. I got to reconnect with you, but see, I was trying to do that. See, I'm like, hold on, I'm gonna try to do it. Is that okay? Okay, I'll call you right back. But for some reason with Skype NDI, once it does that, it turns off Skype NDI. Bizarre. There we go. Should be fine now. Nope, still not fine. There you go. Wait to reconnect here. Wait for it to scale back up. Write down the time code at a point.
I ran a continuous ping, no lost packets.
I think it's Skype. I think it's something with the NDI kicking you off. I don't know what it is. I'm not sure. All right.